You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron, live with Ethan Haristodoulou.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Greeks Gridiron. I am Ethan Haristodoulou, and hello again to my fellow USFL fans. Today, I'm kicking off a new series that I hope to be able to run not only through the USFL's offseason, but even into the NFL season, and it is called USFL in the NFL. As we roll through the offseason here, I will be highlighting some of the players of the USFL, whether it's being put through tryouts, signings, things like that, who is going to be on or potentially on NFL rosters come September when the NFL officially kicks things off, and even leading into the preseason, talking about the players as they get their opportunity to potentially shine in some game action during those preseason games. And my hope is that as we roll through the NFL, I'll be able to highlight these players as well, should they make impacts on the respective teams that they sign with or end up being a part of. So a lot to discuss, as there has been a ton of news regarding players from the USFL getting opportunities in the NFL the last week or so. So let's dive right into it. As I go through these players here, I'm going to kind of give my thoughts and opinions on the signings and how I think they could fit in within those teams there and their chances of making said roster if they were to ultimately end up being signed, if they're not already. So make sure you give your thoughts and opinions as well in that comment section down below. But I'm going to start with the very first one here. This is obviously the big one from last week. It came out earlier in the week, the signing itself, and then we got the details this past weekend as quarterback Alex McGough is officially a part of the Green Bay Packers as a quarterback here. He has signed a 1-year, $860,000 deal. Nothing is guaranteed. That is something that is worth noting here. It's a great potential opportunity for him, but nothing is guaranteed. He reportedly had about 12 teams that were interested in with him, and he went to the Packers, and essentially they were like, if this many people that are out here trying to talk to him, there's obviously a good reason for it. They snatched him right up, gave him a deal he just could not say no to, and I'm very excited for Alex McGough here. Now, this is one of the more interesting signings, I would say, because you have Jordan Love obviously going into year 3 of his career now as the starting quarterback of the Green Bay Packers, and nobody really knows what to expect out of him. It sounds like the Packers are all in on him and they believe in him, but there is a small piece of me that does just find it a little bit interesting that they went and got the MVP of season 2 of the USFL in Alex McGough, who looked phenomenal with the talent around him that they had in Birmingham. And listen, I'm not going to say it's going to happen. I'm not saying that I expect it to happen. Who knows? The NFL is a wild place, but like I said, there's a lot of uncertainty around Jordan Love and if he's going to be able to produce now, but as Aaron Rodgers has exited Green Bay. And you look at the roster that they have at the moment, at least offensively in terms of skill position, minus the running back room, you're looking at all second-year or first-year players. You have Christian Watson, obviously, and Romeo Doubs. They're kind of like the two big wide receivers for the team right now. You have second-round pick Jaden Reed that they got from Michigan State this year. You also have second-round pick and tight end Luke Musgrave from Oregon State. So there's just a lot of youth and a lot of young guys that are going to be catching footballs from whoever the quarterback is, be it Jordan Love, or if in some crazy USFL fever dream we have Alex McGough slinging the rock at some point during the season. I would be very, very interested in seeing how things shaped up if for whatever reason Alex McGough is outperforming Jordan Love in some crazy world. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm not saying I expect it or anything. Let me reiterate that. But I'm sitting here wondering, wow, wouldn't it be wild if that wound up being the case? There's a lot of young, good talent there. You have obviously the running back room led by AJ Dillon and Aaron Jones. There's a lot to be potentially excited about for Alex McGough if he does get the nod in some situation where maybe Jordan Love's not performing to expectations. Whatever it may be, I will keep my eyes open on that one. The second signing I'm going to be talking about here, and this is a massive one, just announced, I want to say maybe around like 15 minutes before I started recording, 15, 30 minutes or so, wide receiver Davian Davis of the Birmingham Stallions. A lot of Birmingham Stallion talk in this video here. Signing with the Arizona Cardinals. And this is one that I actually really like for both ends because I think there's potential for Davian Davis if he's able to translate what he did this past season into the NFL to find himself a role in their offense. And for the Cardinals, who are kind of in a little bit of a transition with their wide receiver room right now. You obviously have Rondale Moore and Marquise Brown, but you have DeAndre Hopkins, who just departed here. And behind them, it's not necessarily like a who's who kind of thing, but I mean, your wide receivers behind the two I just mentioned are like Greg Dortch and Zach Pascal. And while I don't want to knock either of those two guys or even some of the guys further down the depth chart going into the training camp right now, they're just like experienced vets and guys that are basically there to prove why they should still be on the roster here. I actually think that there is a ton of opportunity for Davian Davis to maybe surprise some people and carve out a spot, even if it's in like the wide receiver 5 or 6 role, depending on what you end up seeing from the Cardinals and how many receivers they carry going into the season. And I think that there's more opportunity here than in other situations, mainly because they don't have a ton of, they're not like a super tight end heavy focused offense, and they don't really have the tight end talent to be that beyond Zach Ertz. So with that in mind, I'm expecting this would be a team that carries more wide receivers than some others. I think there is a spot for Davian Davis. He got snubbed by the all USFL team this year, and it was very clear he wanted to send a message to everyone that he belonged on that team the following week going into the semifinals. This is, again, one of those guys that, you know, he's coming in with a massive chip on his shoulder. I know he just won a championship, but it was very clear amongst people that were fans of Birmingham, players within Birmingham, and even some others that were kind of questioning why Davian Davis wasn't on that all USFL team. So I'm really excited to see how things play out here. But this is another one of those guys where I think, you know, you have a really good opportunity. Again, Rondale Moore and Marquise Brown are the name guys. The rest of them are all just kind of vets. And also Michael Wilson, the wide receiver you drafted in the 3rd round as well. I don't want to forget him, but it's not like you're looking at a roster that's basically just looking for camp bodies. No, there's legitimate, like, up in the air questions as to who your wide receivers are going to be this year behind your, I guess, main 3 guys, if you want to throw in Michael Wilson there. But yeah, I'm very interested in seeing what he could do in Arizona. Next person we're going to look at here, and this one was a signing that came out last week as well, and I'm excited to see how things shape out for him. This is a little bit more of a crowded wide receiver room, but it is opportunity, and I'm excited to see it. We have ourselves wide receiver Austin Watkins. He'll be wearing number 80, signing with the Cleveland Browns this past Saturday. 1-year deal, $750K, again, 0 guarantees. This is one where, again, the wide receiver room, a little bit more crowded, I would say, just because you have more youthful talent and also guys that I think are fairly established in terms of your wide receiver room. They currently have 14 total guys on their roster. This is a lot of guys that you're going to be battling it out with here. But at 6'3" and 210 pounds, coupled with some serious speed, Austin Watkins brings what a lot of NFL teams really cherish, and that is like that size-speed combo. Again, 6'3", 210, awesome size to height to weight to speed ratio was there. He showed off the flashes of the burst of what he could potentially do with some opportunity there. We saw in week 1, J'Mar Smith threw that 61-yard bomb to him for a touchdown. I mean, it's a crowded wide receiver room, but he does have the physical tools, and he has a little bit of game tape to go with it as well. But, I mean, he's going to be battling it out with a lot of guys. Guys like Jakeem Grant, David Bell, Jalen Darden. Anthony Schwartz is another guy, and he's kind of an over-the-top burner type of guy on offense. But there is some opportunity there. It was announced I think a couple of days ago now, maybe at this point. Wide receiver Marquise Goodwin, a veteran wide receiver on their roster, is suffering from blood clots in his legs. Who knows how long it's going to take for him to come back. I'm assuming that's a roster spot that's going to kind of be wide open, at least for the foreseeable future, until that whole situation gets handled. I don't know how long it's going to take for that to go away and for that to be dealt with. I wish the best for Marquise Goodwin there, but that does kind of open up one of the more, like, I would say, roles that probably seemed more solidified with him being a veteran and a guy who's more proven, I guess you could say, than some of the others that are going to be in training camp as well. But again, another exciting signing. Birmingham Stallions, 3 for 3 on signing so far. And Deon Cain is a guy that he is a signing, and I'm going to give him a mention here, but we don't know where he's going at this very moment. He obviously had a stellar performance in the championship game, but this is another guy that we're just kind of waiting to see where he ends up signing. But Birmingham Stallions, 3 for 3 officially with a fourth one inbound, and we're just kind of waiting to find out where. But he's been set as released or signing with the NFL, whatever it is that the actual designation is by the USFL. I don't remember what it exactly is. They have a weird way of doing it. I wish they would just put designated to sign with an NFL team. That would make a lot more sense to me, but that's where he's set heading right now, and we're just kind of waiting to see where he winds up. The rest of the people that we're talking about, though, we're looking at a lot of guys that are having tryouts here. And now there's a lot of players having tryouts, and this is more so me just focusing on some of the more notable names and guys that you would probably remember hearing about or watching, standout guys, just notable players from each team. And we'll start with the Seattle Seahawks, looking at some guys here, beginning with 2 linebackers here, and I think that this one makes a lot of sense given where the state of the Seattle Seahawks linebacking situation is, especially on the interior or inside of the linebacking corps. They have brought in Mahler's linebacker Kiava Tizino and also linebacker Frank Ginda from the Panthers. Obviously, Tizino, 2023's USFL Defensive Player of the Year. The guy had 93 tackles and a couple of interceptions, and then, of course, Frank Ginda as well, just an absolute dominant force on that Panthers defense there. 104 tackles. He had 3 interceptions and a sack. This makes a lot of sense to me because when you look at the linebacking corps on the interior part of things, you have Bobby Wagner, who they just brought back after taking his 1-year hiatus to LA. And then you also have linebacker Jordan Brooks, 2 guys who actually worked really, really well together up until Bobby Wagner's departure just a couple of seasons ago. But then behind him, it's kind of like another situation of who's who and just who are going to be the depth guys behind, I would assume, Bobby Wagner and Jordan Brooks as like the 1 and 2. Devin Bush was brought in during free agency here, but when I looked at the rest of the guys on the depth chart, it's not really anyone that jumps off the paper, and this is one of those things where Seattle's clearly looking for all-around linebackers, guys that aren't afraid to get up and physical during the run, but also guys that can drop back and play in coverage, and I think Ginda and Tizino both fit that bill very, very well, and I would be legitimately shocked if at least one of these guys aren't on Seattle's roster at the beginning of their training camps. I just think that these 2 guys are the definition, based off of what we saw from them in the USFL, as the interior or middle linebackers, interior linebackers. I don't necessarily know what you want, depending on what you want to call them. They're interior linebackers because it is a 3-4 scheme, but the inside linebackers, interior linebackers, whatever you want to call them, middle linebackers, whatever your jargon is. But Seattle needs those guys on the inside, especially when it comes to depth. And realistically speaking, just based off the performance that I saw from those 2 guys this year, I mean, either one of those guys could be brought onto this roster and still be on that roster come the 53-man roster cuts. And I wouldn't be shocked to see even just, one, maybe even both of them if Seattle really wants to give them both a go. Devin Bush is kind of an experiment right now. He's so much athleticism, but did not quite pan out in Pittsburgh the way a lot of people hoped. And then again, who else is really behind them that you're looking at going, yeah, it's not like we can give up his roster spot for one of these 2 guys. There is some serious potential for a depth spot to be locked up by one or even both of these guys should they end up signing, but definitely something worth keeping an eye on because I think this is a realistic possibility for one of these guys at the very least, 2 in a really good situation. Next teams we're going to look at here, we have 2 of them, but both New York teams we're taking a look at here because they both had interest in some New Orleans breakers here. The New York Jets taking a look at running back Wes Hills, and then the Giants taking a look at cornerback Neville Clark. Now the Jets here, looking at Wes Hills, absolute no-brainer to me. When you consider the situation right now with Breece Hall still coming back from his injury, not necessarily 100% certain when his return is going to be, you need more bodies in that running back room, and on top of that, you want to think long-term as well. And when I look at the guys behind Breece Hall that were at least on the roster last year, you have Michael Carter and Zonovan Knight, 2 guys that did not really do a ton for the running game once Breece Hall went down with his injury. I could truly see Wes Hills, should he be signed by the New York Jets, as a legitimate running back 2 for this team here, maybe running back 3 at the very worst. Wes Hills was an absolute force. Now, obviously teams kind of caught up and figured out exactly what the Breakers were doing after the first few weeks of his initial tear, but he was still a very consistent and productive running back for the most part the remainder of the season. He finished with 679 yards, which is a modern USFL record now. I mean, if you're a New York Jet and you have any idea what Wes Hills did, you should want him on your team. And if you're a fan of the New York Jets and you don't know anything about Wes Hills, go watch some of the games from this past season and tell me why you wouldn't want somebody who was able to score 3 touchdowns in a game multiple times and be able to, again, lead the league in rushing yards despite that come down to earth moment a few weeks into his first appearance. I would be shocked if he gets into the Jets locker room and he's not there come week 1 of the season, because I think Wes Hills is very, very good at what he does and would be a great addition for the group there over in New York. As for the Giants bringing in Neville Clark was one of the guys that was probably one of the most consistent defensive backs on the New Orleans Breakers here. When you look at his numbers, he had 7 passes defense, a couple of interceptions, 26 tackles, even had a forced fumble, and he was one of the highlights of the New Orleans secondary. When you look at the depth chart, at least right now, from what I'm seeing from in a few different places here, it looks like Adoree Jackson and Deontay Banks are out wide for you at cornerback, with Cordell Flott sliding into the slot position here. I'll be curious to see how that all shakes up, but then the depth behind them I wouldn't really say is too solidified here. You do have vets like Amani Oruwariye and Darnell Holmes as like the notable names of depth guys there, but not anyone that really jumps off the paper. And to me, could I see him as like the 4th or 5th cornerback there, depending on how many corners the Giants ultimately want to bring along with them for the season? Absolutely. So I do think this one makes a lot of sense here, and wish him the best of luck on that. Now, here's one that I'm really excited to talk about, and this is with the Buffalo Bills and tight end Jace Sternberger. In 2023, Jace Sternberger had 33 catches for 517 total yards. He had 7 receiving touchdowns and a whopping 15.7 yards per reception. Jace Sternberger kind of looked like a man amongst boys in some situations when he was getting the rock thrown his way. And this is one of those things where you wonder, okay, if you know what's going on with the Bills right now, you have Dawson Knox. He's your tight end 1. You brought in Dalton Kincaid from Utah during this year's draft as well. Very athletic. A lot of people excited to see what he can do in this Bills offense here. You wonder, well, why are you going to be bringing in a guy like Jace Sternberger? And how can you bet on Jace Sternberger even being on this roster or getting the opportunity to be there? Well, the reason I think that this would make a lot of sense, in my opinion, is because I'm expecting to see some more 2 tight end sets out of Buffalo, because they want to try and get both Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox on the field at the same time. And if that winds up being the case, you're going to need either 3 or 4 tight ends altogether to be able to fill out your depth chart and be able to have guys that can come in and spell either one of those 2 tight ends should it be necessary. So if you're going to field, let's say, or house, I should say, 4 tight ends altogether on the roster, why would Jace Sternberger not be tight end number 3 or tight end number 4? He's a guy that already has NFL experience and back in Green Bay. And when you look at the guys that he's going to be battling should he sign with the Bills, not anyone that I'm sitting here going, I don't think Jace Sternberger could beat out those guys. You're looking at Quentin Morris, Joel Wilson, and Nick Gugemos. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. This is a guy that I think has a real opportunity at filling out even, I would say, tight end 3. I mean, he already has NFL experience, and he made a few plays here or there when he was in Green Bay. So you see the dominance that he had in the USFL. And if people want to sit here and say that the USFL are just players that are, 3rd and 4th stringers that didn't make it on the NFL rosters, if Jace Sternberger is dominating those guys and you need 3rd and 4th string tight ends to back up your 1 and 2, why would you not want a guy that had 7 touchdowns, 500 and some odd yards, and averaged a whopping 15.7 yards per reception? That's the one that really sticks out to me. Bring him in. I think he would be an excellent fit for Buffalo, especially if they are leaning more towards maybe running some more 2 tight end sets to really work with what they've got on the offensive side of things in their roster. And then finally, the last piece that I would like to discuss here, and this was also brought up today, and I also want to shout out James Larson from Pro Football Newsroom. This is where I get a lot of this information from, as far as the tryouts go. Signing and stuff like that obviously gets reported by everyone, but I do want to shout out what they do over there at Pro Football Newsroom, because they do an excellent job of covering this all. I am literally just relaying and giving my thoughts on it all here. And so shout out to those guys. Greatly appreciate the work that you do. If you have not followed either Pro Football Newsroom or USFL Newsroom or James Larson himself, go check those guys out. But final guy we're looking at here with the Texans, Panthers defensive end Breeland Speaks getting himself a tryout here. Obviously, if you followed the USFL, Breeland Speaks, you know the name. The guy was an absolute force on the defensive line for the Panthers. 2023, he had 53 total tackles, 6 of them for a loss, 9 sacks on the season. This one is kind of another no-brainer to me. When you look at the Texans last year, middle of the road unit as far as getting after the quarterback and bringing down the quarterback, they had 39 sacks on the season. Not terrible by any means, not great, literally middle of the pack. They went and drafted Will Anderson Jr. this year in round number 1 to go along with their selection of C.J. Stroud. Massive, massive decision there. It was obviously a very exciting moment during the draft when that all went down. But when you look at just the rest of the pass rushing group here and guys that were working on the edge and where the sacks kind of came from, you could use a guy like Breeland Speaks. Because right now, Jonathan Greenard, coming off of a year where he only played in 8 games, had a sack and a half. I was expecting a much bigger season for him, but ultimately not being able to play as often as you would have liked him to. Again, he only appeared in 8 games altogether. He had 8 sacks a couple of seasons ago, but just not the season I thought he was going to follow it up with. And then Jerry Hughes, 34-year-old Jerry Hughes, mind you, was your leader in sacks with 9 this past season. It's clear that you do need a little bit of help and some depth there on that defensive line. And Breeland Speaks showed a level of talent this past season that was, again, clearly a step above some of the guys he was lining up across from and against throughout the season. And again, to go back to that point, like I mentioned with Jay Sternberger, you know, if the people that want to rag on the USFL for being 3rd and 4th stringers in the NFL and blah, 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 and the guys that didn't make the roster, well, if you're looking for a 3rd or 4th string guy or a depth piece, Breeland Speaks is a guy who I think has a real opportunity to make some noise and find himself in a solid rotational piece on a Texans defensive line that is not old, not necessarily young, but is kind of in a weird transition where you could use some youthful talent like Breeland Speaks on that group there. So him being brought into Houston would be kind of a no-brainer to me, in my opinion. Would love to see him in Houston, and that's coming from a Colts fan. So you take that for what you will. But those are some of the big signings, some of the newsworthy guys that are getting tryouts right now. Like I said, this is something that I plan on doing throughout the offseason into the NFL season. I was trying to come up with ways where I could keep working with the USFL as I roll through the offseason and beyond. I don't want just my channel, like last year, channel kind of fell flat. USFL content disappeared for months. I want to be able to continue to talk to USFL as we go through. So USFL in the NFL is my way to do so. And I'm hoping to be able to bring this up at least a couple of times a month or so, give or take. So like if I could do it once a week, that would be ideal. If I could get it in twice a month, every other week, something like that, that would be good as well for me. But I'm hoping that I could get it along at least once a week for the foreseeable future as we start to get names brought into to training camps and trying out with teams. And as we roll into the preseason when some of these guys are probably going to be getting opportunities to play and I can highlight their performances. But that is it for me. I appreciate you if you made it to the end of the video. Again, comment down below your thoughts and opinions on some of the signings, the tryouts, other guys you might see where you think other players not even mentioned here that you could see fitting in really well in some teams. If you see a hole or two, maybe on your favorite NFL team or just a hole on a team that you happen to know about, fire away in the comments. I would love to hear all of that. But that is it from me. Thank you all for watching. I will see you all next time. Have a good one.